Hi, I'm attorney James Ratchford, and I'm here to talk today about the standard of disability for Social Security disability. Standard of disability is the legal term for what we have to prove in order to prove that a person is eligible for disability benefits. Generally speaking, the standard of disability is going to be what we call less than sedentary, or the inability to perform work at any exertion level, including sedentary work. Less than sedentary is the standard of disability for people under age 50 who, regardless of past relevant work, who are under age 50 and can no longer work. If you're over age 50, there may be other rules that come into play, which we refer to as the grid rules, which are rules that allow a person who is over age 50 and has heavier past relevant work to be able to qualify for disability benefits while still being able to do sedentary or light work. And we'll go into that in a separate video. But for people who are under 50, we need to rule out the ability to perform any substantial work in the national economy on a full-time competitive basis. So in order to understand what the less than sedentary standard is, we should first understand the basic requirements of unskilled work. Regardless of exertion level, all jobs are going to require certain basic things. You need to be able to attend to the office or workplace for 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. You need to be there on time every day. You need to be there every day of the month. Out of a typical month, there are 20 work days. You need to be able to attend 20 work days. You need to be able to pay attention to the task that you're doing. You need to be able to follow instructions and pay attention. Stay focused. You need to be able to work for 2-hour intervals with breaks every 2 hours, a 15-minute break in the morning and afternoon, and a lunch break of 30 minutes or more unpaid. Some workplaces allow for more breaks than that, but generally we're going to expect a person to be able to work that amount. You need to be able to remain on task for about 90% of the workday. You need to be able to move around the workplace as needed, whether that's just a couple of hours or being on your feet most of the time, depending on the requirements of the specific job. You need to be able to use your hands to manipulate things, such as typing or handling a computer mouse or operating a telephone. There needs to be some use of your hands. And that may be more in sedentary work than in some other jobs, because in sedentary work you're going to be manipulating something the whole time, unless you're in a customer service role where you may just be speaking, but in that case you need to be able to speak and communicate clearly. You need to be able to interact appropriately with people such as coworkers and the general public. Not every job is going to require that you be able to interact with coworkers. Not every job is going to interact with the public, but every job is going to have some interactions with coworkers or supervisors, and you need to be able to respond appropriately to supervision and criticism. Particularly if you make a mistake, you need to be able to respond to that criticism without disrupting the workplace. And finally, you need to avoid workplace disruptions, because if you cause conflict with other people's or other problems in the course of the workday, that's not going to be tolerated. So that's what it takes to maintain work in most workplaces, regardless of the physical exertion, and obviously a lot of jobs have other requirements beyond that, such as being on your feet for most of the time or doing any kind of heavy lifting, etc. But all jobs are going to require the things that I just described. So what is less than sedentary? Less than sedentary is going to mean that your functional capacity, which is what you can and cannot do in light of your medical condition, if your functional capacity is reduced in a way that doesn't allow you to perform unskilled sedentary work, then your condition is going to meet the less than sedentary standard of disability, and the government will find that you cannot work and that you are disabled. So what are some of the things that get a person to less than sedentary? The easiest is if you can't get through a workday in work-like postures of sitting, standing, and walking. If your ability to do those things doesn't add up to 8 hours a day, then you're going to be less than sedentary and you're going to be able to be found disabled. We answer that with a questionnaire that we send to doctors asking them your ability to sit, stand, and walk. If the hours that you can spend doing those things do not add up to 8 hours, then you're less than sedentary and you are unable to work. There are other tasks that have to be done in order to sustain work. So other things that we'll ask a doctor will start with absences. If you're likely to be absent from work more than once a month, most vocational experts are going to agree that that is incompatible with work, and a person who's going to be absent from work more than once a month or so is going to be disabled. Same with being late to work. If you're going to be late to work by a significant amount, more than once or twice a month, or if you're likewise going to leave the workplace early for reasons related to your medical condition, then that's going to be disabling as well. If you're not able to use your hands for manipulation of objects, we call it finger, handle, feel. If you're not able to do that most of the time, at least 2/3 of the day, then that's going to be less than sedentary, and in most cases will rule out the ability to work and lead to a person being found disabled. If you have mental limitations that keep you from performing the mental requirements of work, such as being able to appropriately interact with coworkers and supervisors, or being able to stay on task, stay focused, and stay on task for 90% of the time, and be able to work in 2-hour intervals, any of those things could knock you out of the workforce. So if you have mental limitations that keep you from being able to work 90% of the time in 2-hour intervals, that can lead to a person being found less than sedentary and disabled. Similarly, if you can't handle the stress of work, that could lead to a person being less than sedentary. What that means is that if your medical condition diminishes your tolerance for stress such that you can't tolerate even the low level of stress that's required in all jobs, including the simplest, easiest jobs, if you can't handle that stress, then you're going to be found disabled. Now, when I say you're going to be found disabled, this is dependent on the decision maker in your case agreeing with us that you have these limitations. So when we get to a Social Security hearing, we're going to talk to the judge about your limitations, about how things affect you, and we're going to want to prove it with documentation from your doctors. So it's going to be very important that we get a questionnaire or a letter in which your doctor describes your limitations and explains to the judge or the decision maker how and why it is that you can't meet the requirements of work. We will need to support that with references to your medical records. So it's not enough for a doctor to simply say this person can't work. We need to know exactly what elements of the job you can't handle and why that is from a medical perspective. When we get to a hearing, we're going to usually have somebody called a vocational expert testify. The job of the vocational expert is going to be to figure out whether certain limitations can be reasonably accommodated in the workforce. If a limitation can be reasonably accommodated and a person can still work in spite of it, that person is not going to be disabled because of that limitation. But if the limitation cannot be reasonably accommodated in the workforce and an employer would not tolerate it, then that person will be disabled because of that limitation. And when we get to a hearing, that discussion with a vocational expert will be very important in determining what the judge will find in terms of what you can and cannot do, and ultimately whether that leads to you being able to work or not. So that's a basic overview of what we call the less than sedentary standard of disability. That information should be a starting point in helping you understand whether you are disabled, and if so, what needs to be proven in order to win your claim. If you need help with this, and if you'd like to discuss whether your specific limitations will satisfy the standard, give me a call or send me a Facebook message, and I'd be happy to discuss this with you. I'm James Ratchford. You can find more information about Social Security on my blog at jamesratchford.com and my Facebook page at James Ratchford Law. Thank you very much.